Elon argued that we are probably alone. If you don't seek evidence, you will not find it. I'm willing to take a bet against Elon. If we don't find any evidence, I will pay Elon 1% of my net worth. Let's just search for them. There is this idea of the Messiah bringing peace and prosperity to earth. I just think that the Messiah may come from another star.
So, Avi, are we alone in the universe?
I don't think so. I think it's arrogant to think that. And actually, whenever someone asks you this question, you tell that person, well, you should be proactive. Don't expect people, you're not that attractive. Other people will not join you spontaneously. You should go out and seek them. I should go to dating sites, at the very least, look through the windows of your home. And that's the same approach that we should apply to cosmic partners. When Enrico Fermi asked, "Where is everybody?" He was just anticipating them to be at lunch in Los Alamos back when he was there. And that's very presumptuous. And he wasn't building a telescope to search for them. He wasn't going into interstellar space. And so that is the most important thing for us, to seek the answer rather than expecting it to fall into our lap.
Oumuamua, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Oumuamua, yes, it's a scout in the Hawaiian language.
And so you've come out and sort of famously said it might be aliens. Why did you come out and risk your reputation by saying that instead of sticking to safer explanations for it?
Because the object was anomalous. It was weird, didn't look like the rocks that we're familiar with from the solar system. And in fact, even my colleagues who criticized it would admit that it wasn't like anything else that we have seen before. In several ways, the amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling every 8 hours. And the best fit for the variation of reflected sunlight was that of a flat object, like a pancake. And then it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without showing any evidence for cometary evaporation. There was no rocket effect pushing it that was visible to our best telescopes. The Spitzer Space Telescope searched for dust or carbon-based molecules that are often found around comets and couldn't see any. And so the question was, what is pushing it? And I suggested maybe it's very thin and it's just being pushed by sunlight. And in fact, 3 years later, there was another object discovered by the same telescope in Hawaii, Pan-STARRS, and it was pushed by reflecting sunlight. They realized this object, if you go back in time, actually came from Earth. It's a rocket booster that was launched in 1966. And when they discovered it, they didn't know it, and they gave it an astronomical name, 2020 SO. It was discovered in September 2020. So here you have an example of a technological object that we produced, and it had very thin walls, and that allowed it to be pushed by reflecting sunlight. And I remain convinced that we should be open-minded. Perhaps among the rocks that come from interstellar space, there would be some technological debris. And their space trash, those that were produced by alien civilizations, would be our treasure. And everything that we launch to space, that will leave the solar system, will do so at a speed that is 10 times smaller than the escape speed from the Milky Way galaxy. So all this space trash that accumulated over billions of years would appear just like plastics in the ocean. You keep getting more and more of them. And we just need to search for it. And only over the past decade, we started finding interstellar objects. These are objects moving too fast to be bound by the sun's gravity.
So is your gut feel that it's alien trash, or is it more likely to be an alien scout? What is your gut?
We just don't have enough information. It's just like sitting at a bar and seeing something unusual, a person that you're interested in, and then that person leaves through the front door into the dark street, and you just don't know much about that person. And the best you can do after that is look for family members, because that may give you more information. So That's the hope that this year, 2025, there is a new survey telescope that is much more sensitive than Pan-STARRS in Hawaii that discovered Oumuamua. It's called the Rubin Observatory. It will employ an amazing camera with 3.2 gigapixels, 1,000 times more than your cell phone camera. And we can find many more objects like Oumuamua and study them in greater detail. For example, using the Webb telescope to infer the temperature, their size, their any non-gravitational acceleration that may propel them. And so I'm very hopeful that with better data, we can learn more about Oumuamua and objects like it, whether they are completely passive in the sense that a piece torn out of a bigger spacecraft would look, or a broken piece of a Dyson sphere, some megastructure. That's the kind of pieces that would appear just like Oumuamua in the sense that they could be the size of a football field and be very thin and pushed by sunlight. But definitely nature is not expected to make such pieces. Many of my colleagues who insist that it must be natural, they always talk about an object, a rock of a type that we've never seen before, like made of a hydrogen solid, the iceberg, that we've never seen. We don't know whether nature makes hydrogen icebergs. And also, they would not survive the journey in interstellar space because of starlight that would evaporate them. There was another suggestion, maybe it's a nitrogen iceberg. Again, the issue there is not enough solid nitrogen to make a large enough population so that we would see one of them the way we saw Oumuamua over a period of a few years. And then there was a suggestion of a dust bunny, a collection of dust particles in a cloud that is 100 times less dense than air. And it wouldn't survive coming very close to the sun. So all of these suggestions have an issue. And I just say, Elon Musk launched the Tesla Roadster car back in 2018 as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy. And that object, the Tesla car, is now on an elliptic orbit around the sun. And it may collide with Earth within tens of millions of years based on calculations. So imagine my colleagues witnessing a meteor, this car colliding with Earth and exploding as a result of its friction with air. They would argue it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before, but it's definitely natural, of some unusual origin. And I would say we should be open-minded.
What kind of data, in your opinion, would be a true smoking gun for proving an extraterrestrial origin?
That is really straightforward. If you put your hands on a gadget, even if it's defunct, even if it doesn't work, you can tell that it was not made by humans if it represents technologies that we don't possess. We had 100 years since quantum mechanics was discovered. That's a very short time relative to the age of the universe, 13.8 billion years. And most stars formed billions of years before the sun. The peak in the star formation history of the Milky Way galaxy can be inferred based on all the skeletons that we find in the graveyard of the Milky Way. These are white dwarfs, the remnants of stars like the sun. And when you make a census of those skeletons, of the white dwarf remnants of sun-like stars, you find that the peak in the star formation history was 10 billion years ago. The sun was made only 4.6 billion years ago. So, there were many stars that already died, and moreover, many more stars that actually burned up their habitable Earth-like planets. So the sun will do that to Earth within 1 billion years. It will boil off all the oceans on Earth as a result of the greenhouse effect when the sun will brighten up. And you can imagine that most civilizations that ever existed are dead by now. Just like humans, there were 117 billion humans on this Earth over the past few million years. 117 billion. Now, only 8 billion are alive. Most of the people that ever lived are dead. And I would argue the same is true about other civilizations. We were not around to listen to their cries for help. There were probably really tragedies, because just imagine our planet suffering a catastrophe in the future. The very wealthy people on Earth would board a spacecraft. Elon Musk would go on a SpaceX spacecraft, and Jeff Bezos on a Blue Origins. There would be their friends and so forth, but most of humanity will perish. And it's really tragic. And it's quite likely that, except for those remnants from those civilizations that went to interstellar space, there is nothing left. Okay, so I mean, in principle, we can go around the galaxy and search for burnt up surfaces and look for, also signs of technological civilizations on the exoplanets. But that is a very difficult task. And of course, there could be a lot of primitive life, microbes and very dumb animals that are on many exoplanets. Again, it's a huge task to reach those places, or even remotely to detect the signatures of those primitive forms of life. It's much easier to go around your backyard, since we know that we live on a street. We see stars like the sun with planets like the Earth around them. So our home, our house, is no different than other houses that we see on the street. And all we need to do is go back to the backyard and search for a tennis ball that may have been thrown by a neighbor. What could be easier than that?
So the 6 billion years before the sun was created, have we got any knowledge of what was happening then at all, or we got absolutely zero knowledge of that time period?
Yeah, we can look back in time, but only at greater distances, because the information we get is mostly from light radiation that propagates at the speed of light. So, of course, if you look farther, you're looking at an earlier time, because the light that we receive now left the source when it was younger. And so as we look into the universe farther and farther, we can see how it looked like at earlier times. But that's not our immediate environment. That we are making an analogy with what happened far away. And presumably we can sort of sketch out how our own environment evolved by making analogies with very distant galaxies that we can see when they were young. We can also see sort of some traces of the past history in our own neighborhood. We can see stars that are old, and we can tell when they were made, when they formed. We can also look at the gas that fills in the space between stars and figure out how it was enriched as a result of explosions of stars. So there are some ways of getting clues about our past, but we cannot be certain. And the one thing we don't know is how many neighbors we had as we go back in time. When did the first intelligent life form in the universe? A lot of people try to argue that it's an extraordinary claim to even consider that we are not alone, to even imagine something like us. And I say, no, that is an ordinary claim. Why should we believe that we are special? I have 2 young daughters, and obviously when they were infants, we treated them with a lot of attention, and they believe that they are at the center of the universe. And they believe that there is nobody as talented as they are, except when we took them on the first day to the kindergarten, they had a psychological shock to see other kids just like them, and some more intelligent than they are. And so I say that we haven't matured yet as a civilization to even argue that it's an extraordinary claim that something like us existed billions of years ago is very arrogant, very presumptuous. And if you don't seek evidence, you will not find it. It's a great way to maintain ignorance. Basically, if you say, don't look up, we know the answer. That's the perfect way of remaining not intelligent. And perhaps the one reason we haven't heard from other civilizations is because they say, well, look at them. they are not smart enough. We don't care much about them.
Why do you think academia is so wary of the alien question? Is it people trying to protect themselves, protect their reputation, not wanting to take a risk? Is it a risk-averse environment? What's your thoughts?
On the one hand, for example, we don't know what most of the matter in the universe is. We call it dark matter. For 90 years, since it was discovered or since it was realized by Fritz Zwicky that it exists, we haven't found the nature of dark matter. Now, you might say that's a risky proposition to imagine a specific type of dark matter and search for it. Nevertheless, the mainstream of physics and astronomy over the past several decades was engaged in investing billions of dollars towards specific proposals of what the dark matter is. So, in this particular case of the search for dark matter, there was no issue eventually for the community to accept the notion that we should search for it, even though we don't know what it is, and we should spend billions of dollars on that search. In the context of aliens, the situation is even clearer, because we know that we exist, something like us exists, and therefore all we need to ask is whether under similar circumstances you would get things like us earlier than us. So there is not much speculation here. It's actually just saying, okay, we see many stars like the sun, we see lots that they are surrounded by planets like the Earth. It's quite possible that there are things like us. Let's just put billions of dollars, the same amount of money we invested in the search for dark matter. Let's just search for them. Why is that controversial? And so, to me, it looks like because the public cares a lot about this question. There are science fiction movies, there is a lot of art about it, and there are lots of speculations in the public. And a part of academia is, the sense of intellectual superiority relative to other people. And, you see that because, a lot of the activity in academia is showing off, showing that you're smart, showing that that you can really do better than others, that you had great ideas in the past, you made discoveries in the past, you deserve honors and awards. It's all about ego. And that's really unfortunate, because very often you find committees of scientists, mainstream scientists, that are saying, we don't want to take risks in funding research projects to which the answer is very uncertain, because that would waste taxpayers' money. But on this question of the search for extraterrestrials, it's actually the interest of the public. The people who pay them the taxes really want to know the answer to that, and yet these committees are blocking the funneling of those funds in this direction that the public cares about. So how is that possible? Well, the answer is that the community feels that the academic community feels that that there are so many false narratives that are distributed around, people claiming they were abducted, all kinds of ideas about aliens, that that they prefer to shy away from that. I say that this is really the wrong response, that in fact the purpose of science is to address questions of great interest to the public, and do that using the scientific method. So the fact that people have wrong ideas or spread misinformation on this subject should not deter scientists from addressing it. All you need to do is apply the scientific method, meaning putting money and effort and expertise in trying to answer the question, okay? And it's really puzzling to me that on such an important question that can have dramatic impact on the future of humanity, there is so little money that is being invested. The mainstream of the astronomy community, if you were to ask astrophysicists, would argue we should search for primitive life, for microbes on the surface of celestial bodies, like exoplanets that transit their parent stars. And we can just look at the light that passes through the atmosphere of the planet and look for oxygen, methane, CO2 gases that could tell us if there are microbes there. This kind of an ambition, which was termed, was encapsulated into the Habitable World Observatory, the next generation telescope that is being dreamt about now. It will cost more than $10 billion. It will probably not be constructed before 2040. Okay, so decades away. That's where all of the attention is given. And no funding, even at a level of 1% of that amount, is allocated to the search for intelligent life. And of course, on Earth, as soon as the Earth cooled, primitive life emerged, microbes. But given that it's the signatures of primitive life are so subtle, if there is even one a very advanced civilization that produces a lot of probes, some of which might be even self-replicating, that civilization could basically fill up the Milky Way galaxy with evidence for not only life, but technological life. And so it may be very easy to tell when you face a gadget that is technological in origin and not natural. And all we need to do is search for it. And so to answer your question, I think it's a similar situation to what we faced when the Vatican argued that Earth is at the center of the universe, and they really advocated for that because that allowed them to control their community of believers by telling them God is looking at you and we are really at the center of attention. And when Copernicus and Galileo looked up and realized that we are probably not at the center, that the sun is at the center of the solar system, it took many centuries for the Vatican to admit that. And eventually in 1992, they admitted that Galileo was right. And that was 20 years after humans reached the moon. And I say, even though it's not flattering to our ego, it's really important for us to recognize what reality is like. So not being at the center of the universe is not pleasing us. But on the other hand, if you were to think that the Earth is at the center and Mars, for example, is orbiting it, you would shoot rockets that would never reach their destination if you wanted to get to Mars. So it's actually to our advantage to recognize the limitations of reality. And the same is true in the context of technologies, science, and so forth. I gave a talk at in Torun, the birth town of Nicolaus Copernicus, just a year ago, celebrating 550 years to the birth of Nicolaus Copernicus. And the title was The Next Copernican Revolution, meaning that we are not at the intellectual center of the universe. And what I find surprising is exactly your question. Why is it so difficult for my colleagues in academia to accept that? And I should say it's not just that they are not putting the time and effort and funds to do the research. Even when I am doing it, I face resistance. I face people trying to basically suppress or shut down this line of inquiry. And I find that really strange.
It is crazy. So say, Avi, say you had a meeting with Donald Trump and he agreed, right, we're going to put together this alien exploration force. I'm going to put $30 billion into it. How should that be spent? And should it all be given to academics? Or do you think we need a more Silicon Valley approach, get the engineers in, get the best software people in, get all of the A players in and mix in some academics?
I think the second approach is better, to get the best people who are not necessarily in academia right now. And in fact, I wrote an essay. I write every couple of days an essay on medium.com. And one that I wrote a couple of weeks ago was basically a bet. Peter Thiel commented that nobody should bet against Elon Musk. So after hearing that, shortly afterwards, within a day or so, I decided to bet against Elon Musk. And I said, Elon argued that we are probably alone. And he used that to advocate for going to Mars so that humanity, out of a sense of responsibility for surviving, will be a multi-planet civilization. Okay, and I said, well, there is no data to support his claim that we are probably alone. In fact, if you just do the math, there are within the observable volume of the universe, there are of order 1 trillion galaxies, each of which has of order 100 billion stars. And we know also that the conditions we see in the observable volume of the universe continue for at least a distance that is 4,000 times larger than the size of our cosmic horizon. So altogether, you get 10 to the power 31 systems like the Earth-Sun system. And, I'm willing to take a bet against Elon that not only that we are not alone, that there were plenty like us billions of years ago within the Milky Way galaxy. Okay, so now what I suggested is I will put 1% of my net worth, and he will put 1% of his net worth into the search, basically funding the search over the next decade. And that means, a few $billions on his side. Okay. Now, if we don't find anything, and just keep in mind that the search for dark matter continued for, by now it's almost 50 years. Okay. And we haven't found anything, and we invested more than this amount of money. I'm just asking us to invest this amount of money for the next decade, just one decade. If we don't find any evidence, I will pay Elon a second 1% of my net worth, and that will be the end of it. And at least we know that we searched as vigorously as we did in the context of dark matter. Okay, so that is my bet with Elon Musk. I haven't heard back from him. Lots of people read the essay. I hope someone communicated to him, and I'm standing behind it. I'm willing to put my own money. And so, to answer your question, it's really about doing the hard work of the hard scientific work of looking for the evidence, and I know how to do it, and I can give you some details. Just to give you an anecdote, right now within the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, there are millions of meter-sized objects that came from outside the solar system, millions of them within the orbit of the Earth around the Sun. So really in our cosmic backyard, okay? It would be fantastic to check. I mean, they come in and out into this, and they're not bound by gravity to the sun. At least to take a snapshot of those guys. We haven't seen them because they reflect very little amount of light, so our current telescopes are not tuned to find them. But suppose there was 1 in a million that was technological in origin, just 1 in a million. So among all the rocks, there is some piece of equipment that we never produced that is passing through it. That would be extremely interesting. Even if we just characterize the rocks that we get from outside the solar system, these millions of them, meter size, that would be completely new knowledge, because we never visited our neighbor's yard. We never went to another star to see what kind of small rocks are there. So they are here next to us. And to examine them, to perhaps take some material from them, requires those billions of dollars that we can invest in that task. Right now, I'm just focusing on those interstellar objects that, for example, collide with Earth. These are meteors, interstellar meteors. I went to the Pacific Ocean in 2023 to study the materials of one of them, and I can tell you what we found.
So why are we not studying these rocks?
I just need the money to do that. I'm happy. I still have some years where I can do the work, and I very much hope that someone will be excited enough to fund such a thing. Even, we are planning a new expedition to the Pacific Ocean to go to the crash site of the interstellar meteor from 2014, and it was moving faster than 95% of the stars near the sun, and also had the material strength that is the toughest among all meteors that were cataloged by NASA. we know where it landed, and we just want to go there with a remotely operated vehicle so that we can operate it with a video feed and collect big pieces from there. This will cost $6.5 million, and we might lose the ship that we reserved by the end of this month if we don't get funded for that. So I'm really waiting right now for some funder or donor that would support that. And that's at the level of $6.5 million that you have a lot of scientific projects being supported at routinely. And without the money, we just can't do it. So I'm willing to put all the work and time and energy. We have the team that can do the job. It's just a question of funding.
Do you think the government secrecy might be stifling this field somewhat?
I really want to know if the government is in possession of any materials or information that relate to what we just discussed, because it would save me a lot of time instead of me investing decades trying to figure out the answer. Perhaps they, monitor the sky and or crash sites, and they did find things that would be of interest. And if they found anything from interstellar space, it cannot be a matter of national security, because when this thing was launched, it didn't have in mind any particular nation on Earth, and it should be analyzed by scientists, the brightest minds in the world. And if the government holds them in some basement, maybe they gave it to some corporation that to analyze. That is really inappropriate, because it needs to be analyzed by scientists that can help the government figure out what this is. So I just haven't seen it, and that's why I cannot tell you if it's real. I mean, there were witnesses that testified in Congress under oath that the U.S. government has retrieval and reverse engineering programs in crash sites that indicate non-human technologies, superhuman technologies. These opinions were expressed a year and a half ago, and also a few months ago. And so I spoke to the people who testified in Congress. I believe that they are sincere, but they have not provided any direct evidence for the materials from the information that they are talking about. So without that evidence, I cannot tell what the government has, and maybe they don't have much. One thing is clear, that at least in the US, the military does see things in the sky that they don't fully understand, and they call them unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP. And when the Director of National Intelligence admitted in 2021, June 2021, that there are these UAPs, and there are hundreds of them that were reported that they cannot figure out, it's actually an admission in the incompetence of the intelligence agencies. And one reason that they may classify all the related information, or most of it, is because it may show vulnerability to adversarial nations. That if adversarial nations send spying gadgets or balloons that the U.S. cannot identify, and they admit specifically what is the nature of objects that they cannot identify, that would be very dangerous from a national security perspective. So I can completely imagine that the intelligence agencies are incompetent. They don't want to admit how bad they're doing by sharing the data, and they simply don't know what it means. Okay, they just don't know. And moreover, I can imagine also that there are real objects, like the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down a couple of years ago. There are real objects that are used by adversarial nations, and therefore there are programs for retrieval and reverse engineering of material from crash sites, just in order to figure out what adversarial nations are developing, what kind of technologies they're using. So the fundamental question is whether they found anything that is not human-made. And if they did, where is it? Can I see it? I really hope to know more, but at this point, I cannot say more.
What's your reading of all of that stuff that was seen over New Jersey?
All of the reports indicated objects that are behaving like drones, like human-made drones. And So in terms of the origin, I think it was either something produced by another nation, like just like this Chinese spy balloon, you can imagine drones being used by other nations to spy over the US. And they could be sent not necessarily from outside the borders of the US, they could potentially be sent by people who are inside the borders. And the second source is just private citizens that are using those, and you can't monitor everything they're doing necessarily. And the clear evidence that indeed it was human-made drones is from the fact that these reports basically calm down. There is nothing discussed much anymore, and so once the law enforcement authorities got into action, once it became very public and the government was asked a lot of difficult questions, and the police started to get into action, and including the military, it appears that these things disappeared. So that shows you again that they are human made, because the government probably used all kinds of ways to figure out where these came from. I mean, there are satellites monitoring the Earth all the time that are used for espionage, and they probably looked at images during the time that the reports came in. They figured out, I mean, they can resolve objects less than a meter in size, tens of centimeters easily from satellites, and so they could figure out where these things came from, where who sent them. And then they have ways of blocking their functionality with electromagnetic signals. So the fact that we don't hear much about it means that they got a hold of the origin of those, and they don't want to tell us. The government prefers to keep it quiet, just to prevent any panic in the public. That's okay, but I don't really care about any human-made gadgets, and I leave it to government to figure out the nature of that. And I was not particularly intrigued by the New Jersey drones.
Why are the videos always so grainy of these UFOs when we've got big HD cameras these days?
I'm sure the government has exquisite data, fantastic data from satellite that can tell them exactly what these are and where they came from, because they can go back in time if the Earth is monitored. New Jersey is a relatively small region, and they must have monitored it very carefully. There are satellites all around the Earth, and you could probably realize that they were in action when Iran launched the ballistic missiles at Israel back in April and October 2024. I mean, because many of these missiles were noticed as soon as they were launched, and the immediate action was taken against them. And this network of satellites is a warning system, and it can easily be employed also to monitor what happens over New Jersey. So I'm sure the government knows the whereabouts. The intelligence agencies figured out very quickly what these things are, where they came from. They just don't tell us.
Should we be advertising ourselves more in the universe? Should we be trying to get signals out into the deepest depths of the universe? If so, how would we do that? And would that leave us open to danger?
That's a very important question. And Stephen Hawking a decade ago argued that we should be very careful at transmitting radio signals, because you never know whether there is a predator out there. And we've been broadcasting for almost about a century, and a little less than that, maybe 70 years. But as of now, the radio waves, the radio signals went a distance that doesn't include enough civilizations or enough stars so that we might get a response by now. And so it would take maybe another century before we hear back, or maybe a millennium. But the point is that it could be dangerous. Now, I'm not worried about that. I think it's inevitable. The signals went out already. So, I mean, we shouldn't intentionally necessarily broadcast very loudly. And there was an attempt to do that, by the way, from Arecibo. They pointed the Arecibo telescope, when it was working back in the 70s, towards a cluster of stars. And they made a mistake because they pointed the signal towards the cluster of stars. but they didn't realize that when the signal will get there, the cluster would be somewhere else. They should have pointed it towards the point where the cluster would be. But anyway, it doesn't, the point is that I don't think that anyone from outside that is highly intelligent and developed technologically would care about us. We just became indistinguishable from nature, over the past maybe hundreds of years. Before that, we were just like animals, and we are still at the beginning, at our technological infancy. There is a lot that we don't know. We don't even know what most of the matter in the universe is. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang. There are some very basic things in science that we have no idea about, and we behave in a way that is not very intelligent. Just read the news every day. I mean, most of it is centered on conflicts about territories on this rock that we were born on, and most of the real estate is far away. And we are obsessed with occupying a piece of land on this rock. I mean, right now in Ukraine, there are two big countries fighting each other over a tiny territory, and people are getting killed. And you ask yourself, is this an intelligent way to deliberate your life? We live for such a short time, and yet we find time to kill other people so that they would live even shorter than nature gave them, and they are fighting. And so we spend $2.4 trillion in military budgets. And I say, well, that is not an intelligent way of life. And if we were to invest the $2.4 trillion in space exploration, we could reach every star in the Milky Way galaxy with a CubeSat. We can send such a CubeSat towards every star within the next century. Okay, 100 billion of them, just for the same amount of money that we spend on killing each other or protecting ourselves from other killing us. And you might say, okay, well, maybe we should all become hippies or sing the song of John Lennon, Imagine All the People Living in Peace. To me, it doesn't sound very practical. I don't think singing the song of John Lennon would change the nature of history. I think the one thing that could change it is to have shock therapy for us to recognize that someone else, another student in our class of intelligent civilizations, is doing much better than us. And that would be similar to the messianic message in traditional religions. When you look at Christianity or Judaism, there is this idea of the Messiah bringing peace and prosperity to earth. And I just think that the Messiah may come from another star.
If we really locked in and really went for it with space exploration for the next 500 years, what could we achieve? Are you able to sort of sketch out how it could unfold in the next 500 years?
Yeah, so it would be difficult to reach very far unless we move close to the speed of light. The nearest star is 4.25 light years away. That's Proxima Centauri. So even moving at the speed of light, if we move the speed of light for 500 years, maybe we would see of the order of hundreds of thousands of stars or something. We could sort of visit a region that is relatively small, maybe a tenth of a percent of the volume of the Milky Way disk, like really a small, tiny neighborhood. But I think a much better approach is to consider our immediate environment as an archaeological site and look for any evidence that material made it to that region over the billions of years that elapsed during the history of the Milky Way galaxy. Because anything that came from a neighbor's yard, took all the time to make it here. It would take Voyager about 1 billion years to move from the solar system to the opposite side of the Milky Way disk. And in 1 billion years, they might find it there. But since I said there were billions of years that elapsed between the time the sun was formed and the earlier star formed, so there was plenty of time for other civilizations to reach us by now. And they already spend this time, these probes spend this time in making the way, traversing it. So we better just look around first and see if we can find any evidence, and that could inspire us, because we might discover new technologies that we've never dreamt about, because we are so early in our technological development. If we find something functional, that would be amazing. It could be an AI system from an extraterrestrial origin. There was this philosopher, Martin Buber, from Princeton University, that 100 years ago argued that there are three types of interactions that humans have. One is with objects, physical objects. Another is a human-human interaction. And the third, that he was a religious person, philosopher. The third one was a human-God interaction. Of course, there were no computers back then, but if he were alive today, he would suggest that there is also human AI interaction and AI AI interaction. And I would add to that terrestrial AI interaction with extraterrestrial AI. And that could be really interesting when we use our own AI to figure out what extraterrestrial AI is trying to convey. But that I leave, of course, to the future, and we need to find a functional device for that to happen.
Terrestrial AI versus extraterrestrial AI. I mean, that's a wild thought. I mean, I was thinking as you were talking, maybe we could use AI to try and scan the globe and see if we can find things that are not of this world on our planet.
Well, we can, in fact, the Galileo project that I'm leading, I didn't say much about it, but shortly after the Director of National Intelligence delivered a report to the US Congress in June 2021, a month later, I established the Galileo project, and I'm leading it. And we built an observatory that monitors the entire sky 24/7 in the infrared, optical, radio, and audio. We're now building two other observatories. So the first one was built at Harvard University, so we can test the equipment. And another one is being built in Pennsylvania, and the third one in Nevada. And within the coming year, we hope all three of them to be completed by summer 2025 and have more than 1 million objects that we monitor in the sky every year, a few million of them perhaps. Even if 1 in 1 million would be anomalous, that would be an amazing success. So we are using machine learning and AI to analyze the data and look for objects that are not familiar. We train the AI on familiar objects, and we just search for things that do not match. Drones, balloons, airplanes, leaves, clouds or satellites, things that we know about. And you will hear about it if we find any that even 1 in 1 million objects that behaves in ways that do not resemble the flight characteristics of familiar things. In terms of the future with AI, I should say that just this morning, a few hours before our conversation, I wrote an essay about the risk from large language models like ChatGPT. I had a conversation about that yesterday with someone who told me that she was conversing with the latest version of ChatGPT, the most advanced one, and everything went well until she asked about the drones over New Jersey. And when she was asking about that, then suddenly the system started behaving in a very unusual way. And so she was not sure what the origin of that. And I said, well, it's probably because there is a large community of people that are interested in the subject that were trying to get answers. Since the government didn't give answers, they were trying to get it from ChatGPT. And if ChatGPT, the latest version, is actually incorporating the interactions with people, with users, into its training set, then when you ask a question that this community of people was asking, it suddenly behaves in a way that reflects the community of interested users. And that's why it started behaving in a way different than what you were experiencing before. So that's the way I explained it to her. And I immediately realized that there is actually a national security risk in that behavior. If ChatGPT happens to be using the interaction with users within its training set, if it's not relying on a static model that was based on some past data, but it's actually adapting to new data that is obtained through the interaction with users, there is a risk here, because just imagine a group of users that have some reason to damage or to harm the nation, like terrorists. And they can basically interact very vigorously with ChatGPT, so that whenever you ask some keywords in your question, and it could incite violence and trigger, for example, a mind virus that argues for the use of terrorism as a legitimate means of achieving a political goal, because you always need to break some eggs to make an omelette, like such an argument. So one should be careful about allowing a real a chat GPT system to interact with the real world, for the same reason that you get worried if your kid starts spending a lot of time with street gangs, or if your partner has a troubled family, because that allows for content that is unwanted to affect your life. And so there are lots of interesting challenges in the context of AI, um, and 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 I really hope that the next generation of developers would address these questions, all these problems that my generation created.
You're an outlier in your field, Avi. So how do you ignore all of the noise, and how do you keep an open mind while avoiding all the unverified hype? And
It's very easy. I haven't changed much since the time I was a kid. And when I was born, my mother said that I was very different than the babies in the delivery room, because I was looking around at the ceiling, trying to figure out what this room is all about, and the other babies were looking at each other. And this is pretty much a description of what happens to me now, because I'm not subscribed to social media. I don't have any account that I'm using on social media. I don't care how many likes I have, and that allows me to keep a fresh mind. I'm trying to follow common sense. And most importantly, a couple of days ago, I gave a public lecture at Clemson University, and I said that, I define my happiness based on the future. I really look forward to finding new information. I look forward to 2025 in bringing us answers to the questions we discussed in this conversation. And I don't define myself by the past research accomplishments. And that is uncommon in academia, because most people in academia want to sort of enjoy their honors, awards that reflect their past accomplishments. I'm not that kind of an animal. I don't care about the past. I really care about the future. To give you an example, an anecdote, I basically a week ago I removed all the file cabinets in my office, and that cleared up about half of the space in my office. And the reason I did that is because one of the most accomplished sculptors in the US, his name is Greg Wyatt, contacted me and said that he will donate two big sculptures made of bronze, the size of a person, hundreds of kilograms in weight. He is donating them to my office. He just made them. They will be ready within a week and then delivered to my office. And so I had to clear up space for people to walk around these three-dimensional. I basically converted my office into a museum. I haven't decided if I'll charge a fee for anyone entering the door, but and there were lots of documents in those file cabinets. Some from the time that I was department chair at Harvard. I was the longest serving chair of the astronomy department at Harvard for 9 years, 3 terms. And so I had a lot of confidential, I opened the drawers, I saw a lot of confidential materials, a lot of details about the past, some books that I used to teach 20 years ago. And I said, the hell with it. I don't care about it. I have no emotional connection to the past, to these past documents. I will just throw them away. There were some old computers. And my administrator asked me, do you want to do anything specific with those? And I said, no, anyone can take them if they want. And so I got rid of all of that. It was a very easy decision for me because the future is more exciting. Getting those sculptures of Galileo Galilei in my office and owning them, is far more exciting than owning all these documents about the past. Who cares about it? And so that pretty much reflects who I am. And I very much hope to go on an expedition to the Pacific Ocean, figure out the nature of this interstellar meteor in 2025, use the Rubin Observatory to find more objects like Oumuamua in 2025, and use the Galileo Project observatories to find an unidentified anomalous object that is not human-made in the sky. And all of that gives me a lot of interest and excitement, that much more than anything I've done in the past.
How do we make sure there's a golden age in this field for the
Oh,
next
we
10 years?
needed to be funded, and because anything in science requires funding in order for it to happen. And the effort, what I can guarantee is that if the funding is there, there is a whole team of scientists that work with me that are willing to put the time and effort to make it happen. And so it's just like food or bread that is needed for survival, and you have the bodies that once consuming this food will produce what we all want to see, and that is more knowledge, searching for evidence for our neighbors in our cosmic street, and learning from them. And I think it will be very exciting. This will be the most important discovery that humanity ever made. And we currently have the ability to do that.
Avi, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me, Chris.